Welcome back to our latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President of Japan Tokyo Training, and my special guest today is Tom Reich, who is the President and General Manager of BAE Systems Japan. Tom, welcome.
Thanks, Greg. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's a very historic day. We're just waiting for a big announcement in America and the US politics. It was going on in the background here with see a new nominee for potential president. But despite all that, we'll talk about leadership in Japan. And, how did you get to become the President General Manager for BAE Systems Japan? Just a little bit about your background, and we're going to be looking for your Japan side of things about leadership. So let's sort of start with a bit of the background.
Sure. Well, as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm an American.
Yeah.
I was a professional diplomat for 29 years. I was a member of the U.S. Foreign Service. In that capacity, I served in Japan as a Foreign Service officer 3 times, 3 separate tours.
This is State Department, Commerce Department?
State Department.
State Department, right, okay.
Right. I served 2 tours at our consulate in Okinawa, the second one as Consul General, and 1 tour at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, where I was a political officer covering Japan's foreign policy. I retired from the Foreign Service in 2010 and joined BAE Systems Incorporated, the U.S. subsidiary of the British BAE Systems plc. I worked at BAE Systems Incorporated at the American headquarters in Washington for 10 years. I was in government relations, dealing with international government relations. Then 2 years ago, I switched over to the PLC side of the company. I joined the British side and joined what's called Global Business Development. That's the part of BAE Systems, the global company that staffs our overseas offices. And it's through that means that I was selected to be what we call country director for Japan, the person in charge of our Japan office. Then my title changed again earlier this year when we legally established our new Japan entity, BAE Systems Japan GK. And so my title got an elevation on paper. And we're also adding a couple of new people to the office. And as you can see, physically, we've moved to a new, larger office. Not a terribly great change. So that's how I came to be ultimately.
So altogether, if you added up your years in Japan, it's going to be quite a few now. How many would it be?
I guess I was also an English teacher here for a year before I started working for the U.S. government. I think in total it's about 12 or 13 years.
12, 13 years, all right. So you've got good Japan experience by the time you came back to run the operation here. So when were you appointed to run the operation here?
In November 2020.
2020, right? So you're just right nicely in the start of COVID when you came over in November, right? Because you started in January.
Well, I arrived in December, shortly before Christmas, with my wife and teenage daughter. And I would never have been able to come because, if you'll recall, at that time, Japan wasn't accepting foreigners for the most part, except I had an exception. My wife is a Japanese citizen.
Nice.
And so I was able to come as a spouse, not as a business transferee. And that's still my title, my status.
Spouse visa.
Spouse of a Japanese citizen.
Wow, okay. Well, at least you had that. You get into the country.
Exactly.
So when you think about it, you had responsibilities in Okinawa as Consul General. You had probably a functional role with maybe a few staff in the embassy, I guess, in Tokyo. And I was also a Consul General and also worked in the embassy, so I got a little bit of a picture of that world and the sort of how it operates. Right. So you've had experience with running Japanese teams, and these are Japanese teams who are usually quite specialized in a way because they speak good English. They're working in the diplomatic area with clearances, and embassies work quite specifically compared to companies. So what did you find was sort of the transition of going from running embassy teams or consular teams to running a private sector team here when you took over for BAE here?
There are similarities and differences. I think some of the similarities are a recognition that Japanese staff often have really deep expertise in their areas of competence. And it's vital to have that kind of competence around you. You can't run your office without it. That was the same at our consulate in Okinawa as well. I think another similarity is often people get stovepiped. Depends on the person, depends on the section they work in, but often cross-communication between sections that should be cross-communicating doesn't happen very robustly. I find that it needs constant encouragement.
Now, is that an organizational thing you've noticed, or is that a Japan organizational thing? And the reason I say that is because often in Japan, Japanese are very keen, in my experience, to know where are the limits of their job. What is my responsibility? Where am I accountable?
Right.
And have that very clearly defined. And so that tends to, well, I guess you call it stovepiped, silo people a little bit. I'm just wondering, is that a Japan thing you notice, or is it sort of an organizational thing?
I think that sort of thing may be present in a number of different countries and cultures. I've found from my experience working here, it's very present in Japan. And I agree with your characterization. I guess we can say it's a cultural thing. As an American, and having worked, as I did, in Washington for BAE Systems, Inc. for 10 years, I know that this kind of cross-fertilization seems to happen more and more naturally in an American context. So I think it's important to recognize, these cultural traits, and when you need something like cross communication to happen, you really, as the manager here, I really have to sort of constantly emphasize that that's what I want to see happen. We'll never achieve perfection in this area, but I find it's necessary to keep sort of going after it and trying to make progress.
So what were some other challenges you found when you first started running the operation? Because you're coming from headquarters in the States, and then you're part of the British component of it. So that means you've got tremendously strong links back into key areas of the organization outside of Japan. So you're going to play a very important role for the team here to get things done. And so I'm sure people are very appreciative of that. But what were some other things you found were a bit challenging to lead the team?
Well, let's see. I'm trying to organize my thoughts here. I think one of your original question was some of the differences between a government Japan office and a private one. And one more I wanted to just point out before I forget it is, unlike government, here in a private company, essentially we are profit-oriented.
Yes.
We want to do business.
Yes.
And I find that in its own way, it opens up mental doors. When your fundamental goal is to do business, bring in income and profit, in a way, few ideas are so outlandish that you should instantly dismiss them. Lots of ideas can flow by. And I find that both myself and our Japanese business development professionals will at least take the time to seriously examine them. Because who knows where what looks initially like an unlikely path may actually lead. And that's quite different from government, where I find that communication channels of endeavor are much more traditional. At least in this business, in the defense business, a lot of it really demands examination. And so we do spend a fair amount of time looking at possibilities here, whereas at the consulate, I think we would not have been that robust in looking at possibilities. So that's just one thing I wanted to
Yeah, and I thank you
express.
for underlining that. And so sort of continuing with, you come in, you fortunately got through the barriers with COVID to get into the job, which is great, and settle in here. And so you start running the team. Now, the office has been here for how long?
Well, a little over 20 years.
20
BAE
years, right?
itself was not officially established until 1999.
Right.
It was a merger of British Aerospace and GE Marconi in the UK. And so those two companies combined, changed their names to BAE Systems. So that's and shortly after that, we opened an office in Tokyo.
So there's been a series of leaders running the organisation. Presumably, a lot of the people here have probably been here quite a long time as well.
Well, the lady who brought you into this office, Yoshiko Ishizuka, is our longest serving employee by far. She's been here almost from the beginning.
Wow.
So, and in
Great
fact,
continuity.
well, we'll be sad to see her. This is her last week in the office before she retires.
Oh, really? Wow.
So we'll give her a very nice send-off.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll be sorry to see her go.
Well, Scotty Samadeshta there. And so,
そうですね。
how did you find, whenever you come into a new organisation, for you, new to you, but not to the people who work here, and particularly a lot of Japanese staff are very, as you say, long-term based, and they've seen a number of leaders come and go, and they know there's a cycle. You're going to be here for 3-5 years perhaps, and then someone new will come. So they've got a certain mental framework about that, how the structure works.
Yep.
And also you have to come in and establish yourself. So what were some things that you did to establish yourself when you first took over?
I think the really vital thing here is for staff to know what your expectations are. They would like to know what the sort of normal routine of office work is going to be, how it's going to change because now you're here. For example, one thing I introduced was we have a regular 10 o'clock Monday morning meeting, staff meeting. Everyone's expected to attend, and each of us is going to go through our calendar for that week and what we're going to be doing, what issues might be, what problems might be, and if necessary, we'll have a discussion on the spot about those things. So everyone knows and expects that, and so they prepare themselves appropriately for that kind of a meeting. They also want to know what's your agenda. The business development professionals know the issues, the opportunities that we're working on. Are you coming in with something new, a whole list of new things that perhaps they're not familiar with? And they also would like to know, what do you think about the things they're already working on? Are some of them perhaps not worth working on? That sort of myriad of questions surrounds any new leader coming into an office, I think. That sort of thing is usually fairly quickly resolved. You can set your expectations and your goals and things like that. Then I think staff's going to look to see, how do you react to inevitable problems that come up, and hopefully new opportunities that come up. I find that staff here is also sensitive to my relationship with my boss.
Okay.
They ideally like to make sure my boss and I are happy with each other. I don't think anyone finds it very enjoyable if you're working somewhere where your boss is having a fight with his or her boss. That at a minimum produces a lot of distraction for the boss that you work for. So they wanted to see how that was working. And my boss, who's not resident in Japan, visits here from time to time and has one-on-ones with the staff. So they'd like to see good synchronicity between the two of us, and I think they do. We here, BAE Systems, I think we're fortunate in that our objectives in Japan, our prospects in Japan are, frankly, our opportunities are robust, and I think our prospects are getting better and better. And I think this is widely felt among the staff too. So it's a good environment in that sense to be working in, with an upward slope in front of all of us, that we're proceeding up and seeing more and more of the horizon. The sun is shining. I'm trying not to be overly optimistic here, but I think we're in a pretty good environment, and they'd like to see, how are we translating, what seems to be good forward momentum into, a longer term future for our company here. Are we going to add additional positions? Are we maybe going to form a joint venture? Are we going to make an acquisition? They'd like to see the sort of game plan going forward for the next 10 years. It's still a work in progress. It probably is for most companies, frankly. But I think we've been able to share enough sense of where we're going to give people a sense of confidence and maybe even excitement about working here.
So when you came in, did you have a type of a set plan, a game plan? You said, okay, my first month, my first, second month, third month, fourth month, or whatever it might be,
Right.
in your mind? Did you have like, okay, this is how I'm going to approach it? Or did you just come and see how the lay of the land was and then
Right.
sort of work it out from there? How did you approach this?
I didn't have a time-based plan.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do this the first month. I just had a list of things.
Okay.
And if I could do all of them in 1 month, then great. The list is done, and then we can move on.
Right.
If it takes 2 months, okay. I mean, it was not a list where you would allow 6 months to go by.
Right.
That would obviously be, not in keeping with what you wanted to do. But the list was focused on the things I just talked about. Establishing a rhythm, setting some objectives over the next year. That's sort of where my horizon was at that time. Some very specific work products that I wanted us all to produce. Some of these work products I already knew in advance because my boss had told me, you've got to do X, Y, and Z within the first, whatever. So I knew we had to get that done. And also, I needed to know more in depth about each of our staff members, about what their experience so far had been at BAE, what their professional growth objectives were, and know a little more about their own knowledge and capabilities to make sure, are they working on the right issues, or is someone else better suited, for example, to work on issue X, and this other person's better work on issue K. That sort of fine-tuning of roles and responsibilities. I was interested in determining that as well.
And also, I'm just wondering, because new boss, people think, okay, it's an unknown here, can't quite gauge him yet.
Right.
How much can I tell him? How much can I share? There's always that equation.
Right.
Or is it the case of, because I've been through this, and you can presume that every new head comes in, goes through a similar process of trying to get to know people and understand roles and aspirations, that they're sort of used to that, so they're willing to share? Or did you get a sense of, we'll just see how we go, how much we'll share, and as we know more, we might share more? Or were people quite forthcoming from the very start?
Well, everyone in the office had been through at least 2 changes in leadership here. Ishizuka-san had been through a dozen.
Right. Right.
So everyone had been through at least 2 changes of leadership. So they in that sense, they sort of knew what to expect, you might say. Also, during my 10 years working in Washington for BAE, I had visited this office at least a dozen times.
Right, okay.
So they knew who I was, or they knew something of me already, and I knew something of them. So it wasn't like we've never seen each other before. All that aside, I will say there was a natural kind of hesitancy at first. That they wanted me to speak first. They wanted me to express where I thought we were going to go. They preferred to answer questions instead of volunteering things. I think that's also a constant.
I guess that's a natural thing in any society or culture with people you don't know, particularly your boss.
Yes.
A very important position,
Yes.
having that relationship. So in terms of, you've set out the direction, they're hoping for a 10-year plan, or you're giving them some magnitude of where we're going, or basic direction of where we're going, so they get a picture of that.
Right.
In terms of engaging them around the work now, what things have you found from your experience, your 12 years or so in Japan, that works well to get Japanese engaged? Because often we have these survey results from Gallup and these sorts of people that come out with the highly engaged percentage is usually something like under 7%. It's usually pretty low relatively, maybe compared to some other cultures. So there's always a bit of a question mark around those surveys. And there's also a bit of a question mark around how we interpret those results too. But just thinking generally about what have you found works well to get people in Japan engaged in their work?
Good question. I'll simply say I do try to underscore regularly the benefits to the office and to the company in general. if we succeed the way we want to succeed
Mhm.
here. In other words, what you're being asked to do isn't really to please me.
Mhm.
It's to benefit BAE Systems Japan, which in turn benefits the global company. And look at the exciting possibilities we have in front of us. You can be a part of that.
Mhm.
Of course, people will be rewarded. I think our salaries are competitive and that sort of thing. But I do try to instill a larger sense of purpose.
Mhm.
And I think that has some resonance among the staff.
Mhm.
I'm not pretending that's a cure-all for the issue you described, but I do think it's important to constantly underscore the larger picture at appropriate opportunities.
So, as a training company, we do a lot of leadership training, and it's always interesting for me. I go into a training room, and there might be a nicely framed vision, mission, values,
Mm-hmm.
statement on the
Mm-hmm.
wall, beautifully printed out,
Right.
and I'll take it off the wall
Yep.
and turn it around, and I'll ask the leaders, these are middle managers usually,
Right.
what's the vision of this company, and then 0. Okay, what's the mission? 0. Values, normally it's around about 5 values, they'll probably get 2.
Mm-hmm.
The group, this is collectively 30
Mm-hmm.
people come up with 2.
Mm-hmm.
So I always reflect on that the leaders sitting in the sort of C-suite top levels of the building are imagining that everybody in the entire organisation,
Mm-hmm.
from top to bottom,
Right.
completely au fait with where we're going with their vision, mission,
Right.
and what are our values, and we're all moving nicely in the same direction together. But in fact, I always think to myself, well, okay, if you can't remember it, I don't know how you can live it.
Right.
So how about if you're talking about having people have a greater sense of purpose, are you employing things like that, having a good understanding of our vision, our mission, what our values are as an organisation to be the glue to bring people together? I mean, if I asked somebody, if someone walked in now and I said, hey, what's the vision of BAE in Japan, or mission or values, could they
Right.
tell me?
Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I think you're skeptical of those vision statements from your remarks, and I am too. Perhaps they're useful in some organizations. I think for an organization that has pretty good self-pride, esprit de corps, you might say, a strong sense of mission, strong sense of professionalism, I think those mission statements don't resonate very well. One example, as I said, I was a Foreign Service officer for 29 years at the State Department. And Foreign Service has a pretty strong professional ethos and a lot of pride in the mission. During the Trump administration, the Trump-appointed Undersecretary of State for Management had this gigantic mission statement put into the main lobby, the main entrance of the State Department on C Street in Washington. I don't remember a word that was in it. I read it on one of my visits, but it was gigantic. You could not fail to see this thing. And it was just deeply resented, I think, by everyone in the Foreign Service. The feeling was, we have to be somehow reminded by this garish display of our mission, of our values, of our need to be professional and responsible. We have to be reminded like this. It was viewed as basically an insult.
Interesting.
I'm not suggesting that company vision statements, therefore, are insulting and have no value. No. But I do think that while they may merit a read, I've never seen an office in the private sector where that statement guided people's behavior or how they viewed each other. I think what has much more impact is when a leader speaks frankly about why they're in this together. And I think the most effective way to speak in that way is not with generalities, but real specifics. Ladies and gentlemen, if we succeed in this thing that we're trying to do, it will produce, maybe a lot of profit for the company, and we'll benefit from that. B, it'll gain us a position in this specific sector, let us say, that itself will produce new opportunities down the road. This could be a like a cash flow. This could be a workflow that flows for years and years. We may even have to add people to deal with this. And a growing office is always a good place to be. This will elevate our company's name in this market in a way it's never had before. Anyone who works on this will have, instant name recognition on your CV or resume if you ever do something else. Those sort of things, I think, resonate a lot more than a vision statement.
So it's more practical and more focused and more individualized.
Yes.
In terms of, I know BAE have got a huge R&D team working on things. So I'm not talking about innovation from the R&D team point of view, because they're specialists in those technical areas. I'm talking about just people who work in the business. In terms of getting innovation, because if people are engaged, then they care. If you're not engaged, you don't care. The mousetrap can stay as it is. I don't need a better mousetrap because I just don't care. But if you care, let's make a better mousetrap. So this idea of having the basis of an engaged group, now thinking about how we can be more creative, innovative, it could be saving time, it could be saving money, it could be grabbing chances, it could be expanding in different areas. What have you found works well in getting Japanese teams to become more innovative in thinking about their work?
Well, I guess there are a couple of ways, there are at least three ways to do it. I'll mention the sort of the way that may not come to mind, and that is bonuses.
Right.
People tend to respond to incentives. And I think if people know that there's a bonus perhaps in store for them, which can go up or down, depending on how well they accomplish an objective. And let's say the objective is to be innovative. Let's think of a different way of doing this. I think people just put more time and effort into it if they have that. I'm not claiming that's the way to do it. I'm just saying I've found that it actually can contribute to a good result. Another way is sharing some examples of successful innovation. Could be another company. Ideally, it'd be our company. Maybe it's a different group of people, not in Japan, maybe it's somewhere else. But to go into like a case history, doesn't have to be lengthy, but just to show you, hey, look what these people did to innovate. The danger there is, frankly, here in Japan, I think it's a heightened danger, is you don't want people to just copy the way the other team innovated.
Right.
That's not the point. The point is they did something different. That's what you want to engender in our own work. Then I think it also helps to explain why you're encouraging innovation. Why is this necessary when the way we're doing it now seems to produce a good result and no one's ever complained? So what's the point? So you have to explain why innovation is something you want to explore. And I think you need to get concrete. Okay, look, if we can innovate and find a way to do this, maybe with a partner that'll reduce our costs, and maybe also increase the chances of winning, then we could actually have a win here. Whereas if we just try to do it the old way, the chance of a win really is much lower. So we sort of have to innovate. That sort of message, backed up by practical examples, I think has some impact.
Do you have any sort of preferred brainstorming technique that you use with teams? I reflect on a previous boss of mine who would just kill innovation by grabbing the whiteboard marker and then say, give me ideas, and then just brutally kill you off with your idea wasn't good enough. He'd tell you it was a stupid idea, or we already did that, and just wiped everyone out, just completely ineffective as a brainstorming methodology. So I'm just wondering, have you found anything here that works particularly well to get ideas to come out?
It's kind of situational. I think the more people feel they have some real expertise in what you're talking about, the freer they'll be to volunteer opinions.
Mhm.
I think when you get into areas where, no or few people around the table really have good expertise in the subject, I think people sort of are often at a loss to know what to say.
Mhm.
One technique, and it's me, okay, I'm not suggesting this be replicated or anything, but in the State Department, at least when I was there, we didn't use visual aids much.
Right.
Our visual aid was a memo, it's text,
Right.
not PowerPoint,
No.
not drawing something on a whiteboard.
Right.
It's talking, and it's usually talking about a piece of paper that everyone has seen.
Mhm.
But it's mostly conversation.
Mhm.
That's what I do here
Right.
more than anything else.
So do you send them a text on a particular topic, and they
Mhm.
know that at some point we'll get together to
Yes.
discuss this topic and be ready to contribute?
Yes, I send an email.
Right.
Because, again, in Japan, look, okay, in our office, people speak English, that's great. But for everyone here, it's a second language.
Yes. Yes.
So I find it useful to put a topic or something you want them to think about in writing, in an email. Everyone can read it at their own leisure, make sure they understand every word. Then we can talk about it.
Yeah, it makes it more sensible. And in terms of building trust, because this, like every society, is trust-based. That's a universal thing.
Right.
But somehow I think trust becomes even more important in this culture. And so, again, you come into a new organization or new people join the organization. What have you found works well to build trust with Japanese teams?
Okay, well, the first thing that came to my mind was maintaining confidentiality.
Okay.
I think that's important in Japan. You could say it's important in any professional context, but I think it's really important here.
So why is that?
Why is that? My own view is Japanese society and culture is a society of secrets.
Yes.
People like to maintain secrets.
Yeah.
They're delighted to find out other people's secrets,
Yes.
but they really don't want to reveal their own.
Yes.
And it's just part of the society.
I guess it's that highly dense urban lifestyle that
Right.
big cities have had in Japan for centuries, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
paper walls,
Yes.
thin separations between people.
Right.
Very hard to keep anything personal and private. So a secret is a really treasured thing, isn't it?
It's a treasured thing. And so, you asked about how to build trust. Whenever someone either tells me something and says, please don't tell anyone, or tells me something that it's pretty obvious I should not tell anyone, I rigidly never tell anyone, ever, period, full stop. I never even have to think about it. I never have to think about, should I tell this person what this person told me not to do? I just put it out of my mind. And I think over time, when people realize you will keep confidential things confidential, it helps them open up.
Okay. Any other things you found work well on building trust in a team?
If you commit to say you're going to do something, do your damnedest to do it. Don't let it slip by. Don't forget about it. Also, the flip side of that is either if someone says they're going to do something, or you ask them to do something and they say, yes, I will do that. Make sure that they do it, that you don't let it go unnoticed if somehow it doesn't get done and time is dragging on. So the trust aspect is you believe in commitments on yourself, commitments on them. You don't let any commitments go by. Commitments will be honored, and if it's on me, I will honor them. I think that helps to breed a sense of confidence that when you say something, you mean it, and vice versa.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. Now, BAE will have a culture in Washington, it'll have a culture in the UK. Mm-hmm. They probably had an existing culture here when you arrived. Mm-hmm. In terms of building a strong culture, you talked about purpose before, which is a very, very key thing. And part of that attainment of that purpose is having a culture that's working towards achieving that and having a sense of teamwork and commitment on everyone's part to play their role. What have you found worked well for building culture, and what sort of culture were you looking to build?
Well, the company would like to have a culture in the office that responds, that basically, let me back up. Why are we here? What's the purpose of the office? The purpose of the office is at least twofold. One is to support our business units, outside of Japan, who want to sell products and services into Japan. So they visit periodically. All those visits, of course, were shut down during COVID, but now they're occurring routinely. So we need to prepare for their visits. We need to help them, decide who they should meet with, go to the meetings with them, report on them, advise them. This is what this meeting meant, et cetera. What are next steps? So that's the sort of service to our business sectors. That's a key function of the office. Another function is for us to independently chart out, where do we think the defense arena in Japan is going? How's it changing? What new money is being put into it by the government? What's the Japanese defense industry saying and doing? How are they responding to that? Who are potential partners for us? What new issues are coming up around the corner in the defense space in Japan? Because we are almost 100% a defense company. So that's a mission that our office has. So if we can perform those two missions, the company as a whole will be happy with our work. But you asked about, what about the culture just inside our own office? Well, we need to have a culture that will execute on those two missions, but also do it in a way that makes this a good place to work. That makes it a place where people look forward to coming every day. It means, we have to be collaborative. We have to work within a Japanese cultural context as much as we can. We need to be sensitive to that cultural context, really at all times. And sort of try to meld what our company mission is, which is flowing to us from the outside, with our whole environment here that we are living in. That's kind of a generality, I suppose. But that's what we try to do here, to blend those two together. And I'm the only foreigner on our staff here. Everyone else is Japanese. So I take cues from our staff. I listen to them attentively as they explain something to me about, this is why things work in our culture. Maybe you're trying to go against it too much. It's going to cause disruption. I do pay attention to what I learned from the staff.
And people are given posts. Okay, you will go to Japan and run an organization there, and often they don't have any real exposure to Japan apart from maybe some visits. Don't speak the language, and they're going to arrive and they've got a job to do. If you're able to give people in that situation some advice, what would be advice you'd give them?
I think people in that position particularly where they have no language skills, they really have to have a strong connection with their staff.
Mm-hmm.
The language thing it's really, I'm not going to say it's critical, because that would imply if you don't speak Japanese, you can't function here. That's obviously not true. But it really is important.
Mm.
And so you really need to have a strong position of trust, particularly with your senior Japanese staff,
Mm-hmm.
frankly, to help guide you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know of any other way.
Mm-hmm.
It would help a lot, I think, to quickly form professional relationships with your peers, particularly in your own industry, people who've been there longer than you,
Mm-hmm.
who can give you some benefit of their experience. But that's sort of my thoughts on that. I'm the only country director here who's able to speak Japanese and read Japanese.
Right.
And who knows if and when there'll be another.
Right.
I don't know. But I do find that, it pays off in legions for me here. I mean, I can watch TV, I can read newspapers, I can talk to people. I feel I'm well informed. I'll just put
Well,
it that way.
you're literate. You're literate in Japan, and people forget that they are literate in their own home societies.
Right.
But when they come here, they're no longer literate in
Right.
this society, and you think, I'm illiterate in Japan. So, yeah, really. But often that case of the new boss comes in, they tend to gravitate towards the better English speakers because the flow of communication is just so much easier.
Right.
But often those particular English speakers may not be the critical people,
Right.
may not be the people with the best connections, knowledge, or impact on the business. So, what's your advice around trying to navigate that? Because you tend to have a bit of a life raft of English speakers, and you tend to jump on the life raft, but that may not be the sea you want to be in.
No, that is so true. You're absolutely right. I think you need to have, if you don't speak Japanese, you need to have a mindset that resists that sort of easy gravitation towards the good English speakers. And, get practical. If you need someone who's good at interpreting, take him or her along all the time, or virtually all the time, and seek out those people who you think really are knowledgeable and good, who may speak little or no English. Bring your interpreter. Just do it. That's how I would handle that.
And also, in terms of some other advice, when we talk about language, we talk about bring your interpreter, get some different perspectives on what's going on. Any other advice you'd give them?
You mean on communicating with people?
No, they're coming in here cold, and they've
I
got
see.
to run an organisation here from their point zero. It's an existing organisation, usually. What other advice would you give them to be successful here?
Well, of course, there's plenty of English language media, newspapers and stuff like that you can subscribe to. That's always helpful. This may sound sort of out of left field, but as you probably know, I'm sure you know, lots of Japanese people are not very good at speaking English.
No.
But they're pretty good at reading. And they can write, maybe not in a sophisticated way, but they can express themselves. And so emails are actually not a bad way to communicate. You can give your Japanese counterpart the time to read and understand what you're talking about. And if he or she needs maybe some help with some words, he or she can get some help and respond. That I've understand from others is actually a pretty good communications tool.
And I imagine too, because you're probably sensitive to it as well, you're probably writing English in a very plain format, not having too many complicated structures
That's right.
or particular words that may not be familiar.
Right.
And now here's a good one. Idioms. Now, I come from Australia, which is like the global capital of idioms, it seems. We've got idioms for everything down there. And I have to really restrain myself, you know, no idioms from Australia, no sporting idioms, no cultural idioms, you know, music idioms from my culture, because it just doesn't fly here. It's like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. So what have you found works well in terms of making your communication easy to absorb?
Well, don't use idioms for the most part. Just think about, you know, if you're writing, think about how it will look to someone for whom English is not a first language. I do that a lot, actually. And I tend to clean up what I write. Yeah, that's a key thing. And, you know, you can do that in speaking, too. If someone doesn't have good English conversational ability, just, you know, speak a little slower and, you know, cut out fancy words and do that. That tends to work.
Are there any other things I should have asked you about leading in Japan, Tom, that we haven't covered so far?
I guess it depends on the industry you're involved in. In the defense industry, I think Japan is becoming more and more prominent for international defense companies. Part of it is the nature of the threats that Japan faces. Part of it is the determination that the Japanese government is showing to strengthen its defenses. And what that means is, for us, and I'm sure for our competitors, our peer companies around Tokyo, the prominence of Japan is growing back in their home offices.
Now, is that a swing away from China? Because I know in my own experience, Japan sort of went off the boil there for quite a long time, and everyone was rushing to China. Do you think there's been a bit of a shift in the wind here, that people are thinking a bit more about where the balance should be?
Well, you know, in the defense arena, China was never a huge player, at least for an American company or a British company, because our governments wouldn't allow us to sell most of our products into China. So in that sense, China was never really a big market at all. It was a very, very small niche market for a few commercial products, at least for us. Japan's importance has definitely grown for BAE Systems. And I think, again, for many of our peer competitors, for the reasons I described. And so I find that I have to do more than I perhaps anticipated in terms of explaining Japan and what it's doing and where it's going back to our external audience.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I go to events that are, you know, defense and security focused or economy focused, because I want to acquire even more in-depth knowledge so I can properly, you know, write what I need to write, frame what I need to say back to our external audience. You and I met at a Jesper Cole economic presentation it was at Tokyo American Club. And I had attended the presentation he gave last year. His presentations on the Japanese economy are not directly germane to the defense industry, but they are an important background factor. And so that's an example of what I've done more of as I need to do more to communicate with our home office and other external actors.
Well, that whole thing about the home office is always an interesting area. It can be a very challenging area because you always run that sort of corridor or that gauntlet, I guess, of trying to explain Japan without that becoming the excuse, you know. And so head office gets a bit cynical, I guess, about, you know, well, this is not working in Japan because it's Japan, as opposed to it's not working in Japan because I can't make it work, you know, and you're not succeeding. That's the problem, not the country. So, you know, how do you find that navigating that thing between where Japan is really quite specific in some areas, and it's not an excuse, it's a reality, but getting headquarters to appreciate that reality?
That's a very good point. I don't do this so consciously, but I do it. What I do is, when I am explaining Japan, et cetera, I avoid saying, well, Japan has this peculiar way of doing X, Y, or Z, or, this is a uniquely Japanese mechanism that, blah, blah, blah. I try to avoid that. I avoid it because I want to explain things in an easy to understand way back to the home office. But it has the effect of avoiding that kind of, Japan is so unique, you can never do things here. It is more effective to explain, well, this is why, this ministry is conducting this competition in this way, is to satisfy this player and this player and this player. And if you do it in those sort of terms, that's something that I think any head office can understand, because that's how it works in countries around the world. So I do tend to explain things in that way.
Okay. Anything else we haven't covered that we should have talked about?
We haven't talked about the impact of COVID per se.
Yeah, please talk about that.
I think Japan behaved admirably during the COVID crisis. I got here in December 2020, so the crisis was maybe 9 months old, and it went on as a true crisis with big peaks, lots of infections, and some concern and even fear. That went on for well over a year after I got here, so I got to experience that. We adopted a very liberal work from home policy, and during the peaks I told staff, okay, it's no longer a liberal, come here if you want to. It is a do not come here to the office unless you have to.
Right.
If you don't have to come, stay at home. So we did that.
And that was based on safety? That was based on... Okay.
Safety, absolutely. And trying not to, it's a safety thing, but I didn't want to put people through the mental turmoil of getting on public transportation, because they all have to take it to get here. When
we talk about public transportation, what you and I are talking about is a train journey where every centimetre of your body is pressed up against a stranger in a packed carriage. So it's not just public transport, it's a crush to get here. So it's a seriously dangerous environment for spreading germs, isn't it?
It is, and even if you stagger things so people don't go during normal rush hour, you may not be packed in like a cattle car, but you're still in a car full of other people, and so it's an inherently unsafe situation. So I didn't want to force people into that. And if anyone ever said, and a couple of them did at various times, say, hey, look, I just don't want to get on the train, I was always quick to say, you don't have to. You can work from home. So I think that's important, because who knows, now they're talking about an 8th wave is coming out. Now, I have some reason to believe we've covered so much ground here as a country, as a society. We've got vaccines. Japanese are very good at taking vaccines. They're very good about wearing masks, et cetera, et cetera. I have reason to believe the 8th wave is not going to be a terrible ordeal. But I think managers really need to be sensitive to their staff's own personal calculation of risk and take that into account at all times until, this is recognized by the vast majority of Japanese as a normal endemic situation, which it is not now.
I think I'm thinking it was back, I'm struggling to think exactly now, I think it might have been spring, that the first hints of a change on the government policy was given by one of the ministers, suggesting that we could probably walk outside without masks. Except if you and I walk outside right now,
and 90% of the people,
everyone's wearing a mask, So the Japanese populace is not following that particular idea at all. I had actually my 5th injection the other day, so I've had 5 now. I have the BA5 variety with Pfizer, so I'm done, I'm good. So there is still that hesitancy, but what about, on the flip side, my own company, we did the same thing, work from home. But now, here we are nearly 3 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what are we going to do? Is it going to be like this forever? Is there an impact here on teamwork? Is there an impact here on communication? Is there an impact here on innovation through spreading ideas and
Right.
thoughts? What's your thoughts on that? Are you likely to see people come back in the office, or are you going to leave them at home, or have a split shift, or a couple of days a week, or what's the thinking?
I don't know what the future landscape is going to. I don't know where it's going to shake out in Japan. I happen to personally believe that true teamwork and cross communication and innovation requires physical presence in the office. I think Elon Musk believes the same thing. I think Tim Cook at Apple believes the same thing. I'm not in their league, but that's just how I see it, knowing this country and this culture. Frankly, I think that's true in any culture, even Silicon Valley. But I think those things are going to depend on in-office presence. I think most office workers in Japan these days feel they should be in the office, even if sometimes they don't want to be for safety reasons. I think they feel it is their duty to be here. And I just don't know how this is going to shake out. I do think that if COVID truly is viewed by the vast majority of Japanese as an endemic disease like the flu, that we'll see pretty good in-office presence. I think it'll just ramp up over time. How much time? I don't know. That's what I think will happen if they view it as endemic. I think they will in the end. I think that just the mutations are going towards a safer version. The vaccines are constantly evolving, I think, and becoming better. Who knows how long widespread mask wearing will be? Maybe there for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, mask wearing here for allergies, kafunsho, catching a cold, having the flu. It's sort of part of the
Yes.
health culture of the society anyway, and this is just another health crisis that
Right.
adds to that. Tom, what would be your definition of leadership?
Someone who's able to harness the capabilities and aspirations of a team of people and ensure that they can do their best, and by doing that, fulfill the objectives of the organization and maybe even the personal objectives of the leader, all without forcing people to do things, all without ordering people constantly to do things. That to me is a real leader. I've worked for people like that. And those were always the best work experiences of my life. It's something I aspire to. I don't claim to be able to do it all the time. But I think that's a real leader. If you do that, then you make people want to do their best. I think people never do their best when they're ordered to do something. They have to want to do it. You have to you have to recognize their abilities, give them some freedom in how to pursue an objective. I mean, look at how the Soviet and now the Russian military conducts itself.
Yeah.
They've always slavishly followed orders from a higher headquarters. And when things change and the orders haven't changed, they're helpless almost. That's a perfect example of the kind of organization you don't want.
Don't have, yeah. Well, Tom, thank you very much. It's been great hearing your thoughts on leadership in Japan. I appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Greg. I've enjoyed it.
Join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.